Dark chosen ones. You're not attracting people, you're attracting your shadow. You think you're attracting people. You think the friendships, lovers, allies, and even the enemies sliding into your orbit are random. You think the chaos in your relationships is bad luck, or maybe a test from some benevolent heaven. Let me shred that lie. You're not attracting them, you're attracting your shadow. Every face, every betrayal, every kiss, every knife in your back isn't an accident. It's architecture. It's the echo of your marrow humming through dimensions and dragging to your doorstep the exact demons you've been hiding under your ribs. Here's the marrow law. Reality doesn't deal in coincidence, it deals in reflection. And the dark chosen one? We don't get cute lessons wrapped in rainbows, we get brutality. While others attract comfort to soothe their fragility, you attract hurricanes to strip your scaffolds. Why? Because power requires pressure. Thrones aren't built in sunlight, they're soldered in storms. And storms don't just come from the sky, they come wearing skin, smiling, holding your hand.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Every person you pull into your orbit is a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They show you what your ego edits out, what your illusions paint over, what your soft spots suffocate. The rage you see in their eyes, yours. The betrayal slicing your spine, yours. The obsession that claws at your sleep, yours. They're not introducing darkness, they're unveiling it. They're dragging the blueprint of your buried self into daylight and daring you to own it. That's why it hurts like hell. Because every fracture they rip open is a fracture you sutured with denial. Now pause and taste this question until it burns your tongue. What if every person breaking you is really building you? What if every collapse is a crown hiding in carnage? What if none of this is punishment but preparation? You flinch at that thought because your ego loves its halo. It wants to stay the victim in a narrative that flatters fragility. But you're not built for halos, you're built for havoc. And havoc is holy when you understand its hum. Here's the black scripture. The universe doesn't hand dark chosen ones flowers, it hands us mirrors dipped in blood. Why? Because our power isn't in polishing perfection, it's in swallowing poison until it ferments into sovereignty. We learn to drink venom without vomiting, to dance with daggers until the blade becomes an extension of our bone. And the first initiator in that ritual is the shadow we attract. These aren't lovers and liars, they're locksmiths. They hold the keys to cages you welded in your own spine. Every heartbreak is a hinge snapping open. Every betrayal is a chain screaming its last syllable. But most of you gag when the process starts. You sprint back to sedation. You medicate the message with mantras about positivity, or worse, you label everyone toxic while rotting in your own blind spots. You ghost the people who triggered you and call it self-care, never realizing you just ghosted your greatest gospel. You keep amputating mirrors instead of interrogating what they're reflecting. And then you wonder why your life feels like a loop. Why the same demons keep showing up in different flesh, wearing different faces, whispering the same words. Because you didn't kill the root, you just decapitated the symptom. And roots don't die, they multiply in the dark. So let me drag you into the marrow truth. You're not cursed, you're calibrated. Every human missile detonating in your orbit is precise, designed to slice your ego until the axis of your being snarls awake. Stop blaming them. Start dissecting the algorithm. Stop asking, why me? And start asking, what version of me summoned this storm? That's the fracture point where sovereignty sparks. When you stop vomiting victimhood and start swallowing voltage. When you stop romanticizing peace and start courting pressure. Because pressure isn't punishment, it's prophecy grinding its teeth in your direction. Now hear this. If you can't metabolize this law, leave now. Go back to your cages fattened with comfort. Your illusions until they suffocate you. But if your ribs ache with a hunger for something black, something feral, something that bends dimensions, stay, because the truth is about to get surgical. The first part you've tasted is just the skin. The next part, it's bone. We're diving into why the shadow doesn't just follow you, it hunts you. And when it finds you, it doesn't knock, it detonates everything soft in your spine. In the next part, I'll carve open the second law. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your architect. And the more you flinch, the more feral it becomes. You think running saves you? It fattens the beast. You think hiding starves it? It hibernates and hunts you hungrier. We're going to talk about why intimacy becomes execution for dark chosen ones, why love tastes like law, and why every heartbreak is an initiation disguised as annihilation. So I'll leave you with a question to chew until your teeth ache. If every person in your life is a mirror, what reflection are you terrified to face? And what will it cost you if you keep smashing mirrors instead of mutating the monster in the glass? When love becomes a guillotine, why your shadow hunts through the people closest to you. You've been told love saves you, that it soothes the chaos, silences the storms, cradles you in halos and hymns. But that's a fairy tale sold by architects of sedation, a lullaby to keep you docile. For dark chosen mons, love doesn't soothe, it severs. It doesn't hold your hand, it hacks it off. Love isn't a lullaby, it's a guillotine. And the ones who cradle you in their arms, they're carrying blades under their ribs, whether they know it or not. Here's the law they never tattooed into your skin. Your shadow doesn't hunt strangers, it hunts intimacy. Why? Because intimacy is incision. It peels layers you've lacquered over your fractures. The closer they get, the more your illusions convulse. And the shadow, the yum you've been gagging under, giggles and hashtags, smells that convulsion like blood in black water. It rises. It slithers. It doesn't ask permission. It detonates. And suddenly the lover you kissed becomes the executioner you curse. Suddenly the friend you trusted tastes like betrayal between your teeth. Suddenly the bond you thought was salvation becomes a scaffold where your ego is strangled until it chokes on its last syllable. You think this is cruelty. It's choreography. The universe is savage with its chosen ones. It doesn't send mentors in robes to stroke your scalp. It sends hurricanes in human skin. It sends lovers who rip your lungs out with a whisper. It sends allies who set your spine on fire because you've been crawling too long. And you scream, "Why is this happening to me?" When the marrow truth is, it's happening through you. That storm isn't theirs, it's yours. They're just the vessel carrying the venom you distilled in secret. They're just the mirror screaming what you've muted for decades. And until you drink that venom, until you let it burn your throat into black law, you'll keep summoning assassins dressed as angels. Pause. Breathe. Let this bleed through your denial. Every heartbreak you've howled about was an initiation you sabotaged. You called it betrayal because your ego got butchered. You called it loss because your illusion rotted. But what if that wasn't destruction? What if that was deliverance? What if the love that gutted you was the law you begged for in silence? You wanted strength. You wanted sovereignty. And sovereignty doesn't sprout in sunlight, it spawns in slaughter. So the universe gave you a gift that didn't look like gold, it looked like grief. And you vomited it out instead of digesting its voltage. Now let's carve deeper. Why does the shadow choose intimacy as its altar? Because distance lets you lie. To strangers, you can lacquer yourself in light. You can purr positivity, post mantras, pose like peace incarnate. But in intimacy, performance rots. They see your fractures naked. They stroke your scars. They sniff your fear like wolves circling fresh meat. And when they touch that tender place, the mask doesn't just slip, it shatters. That's when the shadow strides out like a god wearing your grin. And if you're untrained, you'll do what mortals do, project. You'll vomit your venom onto them. You'll crucify them for crimes coded in your marrow. You'll burn bridges and call it boundaries, never realizing you just burned a classroom where law was being whispered in your bones. Do you feel that sting in your ribs? That's not guilt, it's recognition. You've done it. You've danced this guillotine tango. And you'll do it again, unless you mutate. Because here's the law: you cannot attract purity until you purge poison. And the purge won't happen in temples. It happens in bedrooms, boardrooms, battlefields of intimacy. That's why the same patterns pulse through your life like a dirge on repeat. Different faces, same fracture. Different lovers, same laceration. And you're so drunk on denial you blame the actors while ignoring the script stitched in your spine. So I'll slice you with the question that should blister your brain. What if every person who gutted you was the ghost of your own shadow in flesh? What if they weren't villains but vessels, bleeding your venom so your veins could hum black fire instead of beige compliance? Would you still curse them, or would you kneel in gratitude at the guillotine? The truth is ugly, but it's holy. The shadow will hunt until you stop hiding. It will hijack lovers, sculpt saboteurs, possess partners until you swallow the poison and let it sculpt you into sovereignty. And here's the feral fact: the deeper you love, the sharper the blade. Because depth demands death, the death of illusions fattened on fragility. That's why dark chosen ones don't get fairy tales. We get furnaces wearing smiles. And if you survive, you don't come out whole, you come out humming. Because pieces can't hold this voltage. Only void can. But the next part, it's going to sear. Because I'm about to tell you the third law. You don't just attract your shadow, you amplify it. Every craving, every fear, every fracture you ignore becomes a magnet humming at frequencies that rip reality into a storm. And the more you resist, the louder it hums until it detonates dimensions. We'll tear open why your ambition summons betrayal, why your lust breeds obsession, why your silence births screams you can't cage. And then I'll hand you the blade not to stab others, but to carve your ego into ash so the law can wear your bones like armor. So chew this question like steel. Are you ready to stop cursing the guillotine and start crowning it as your god? Or will you keep mistaking mirrors for monsters until your spine snaps under repetition? The law of amplification. Why your hidden darkness doesn't just echo, it erupts. Here's a savage truth that most mortals will gag on. Energy doesn't evaporate, it amplifies. Every emotion you exile, every hunger you hush, every rage you gag and gag again, it doesn't die. It breeds. It breeds in silence like wolves in the marrow, multiplying in the caverns of your denial until it slithers out not as a whisper, but as a war. And that war never announces itself in the mirror. It doesn't wear your name, it wears theirs. It wears the face of a lover, a friend, a stranger who detonates your peace like glass under thunder. And you call it betrayal, bad luck, or even karmic debt. No, it's amplification. It's the hum of your shadow swollen with voltage until it bursts the banks of suppression and floods your life like a black tide. Do you understand what that means? It means the chaos you curse isn't external, it's your echo wearing claws. You thought burying that grief saved you. You thought muzzling that fury made you holy. You thought amputating desire made you pure. But the universe is merciless with liars. It doesn't honor repression, it punishes it. Every time you smother a truth, you spike its frequency. Every time you fake serenity, you fatten your shadow. And when that shadow gets obese enough, it doesn't knock politely, it blows the hinges off your reality. That's why storms don't start small in your life, they start catastrophic. Because you waited until your shadow mutated into a beast that only devastation can leash. Pause and let this acid burn your throat. What are you hiding so viciously that the universe has to hire assassins in human skin to remind you who you are? Because that's what these people are, assassins hired by your own energy to slaughter your illusions. They're not toxic. They're technicians dismantling the software you've worshipped as identity. They're the necessary demolition before construction. But you keep mislabeling the medicine as poison. You keep sprinting from surgery like a child screaming in a hospital hallway, not realizing that without this cut you'll rot. And here's the marrow law most will never swallow. Intensity attracts intensity. The darker your gifts, the louder your hum. And the louder your hum, the heavier the mirrors the universe hurls at your skull. That's why your life doesn't look like theirs. That's why their storms are sprinkles while yours are apocalypses. Because you're not coded for comfort, you're coded for cataclysm. Thrones don't sprout in gardens, they sprout in graveyards, fertilized with everything you thought you were. And graveyards don't bloom gently, they bloom in blood. So what do? How do you stop bleeding in loops? You stop hiding. You torch the denial. You pry your ribs open and drag the black beast into the daylight before it drags you into a slaughterhouse of your own making. You don't heal the shadow, you hire it. You feed it law. You forge contracts inked in chaos until it kneels not as a pet, but as a predator you command. Because make no mistake, you can't kill your shadow. You can't amputate what's architected into your atoms. But you can crown it. You can turn its claws into weapons that carve empires instead of corpses. Here's the technique most sages choke on. Stop gagging your desires. Stop stapling serenity over your rage. Stop bleaching your chaos until it chokes. Desire is not disease, it's data. Rage is not ruin, it's a roadmap. Lust is not filth, it's firepower. But if you keep muzzling them, they'll mutate into monsters that eat your marrow. Harness them raw. Transmute, don't amputate. Learn the alchemy of appetite. Sculpt your violence into vision. Train your demons like hounds until they hunt for you instead of haunting you. That's the law of the dark chosen. What you fear becomes your famine or your feast you choose. And now I'll slice you with the question that should blister your spine. What part of you are you still burying because you're afraid of its voltage? And what would detonate in your life if you made that darkness your disciple instead of your dictator? Sit with that until it scalds your tongue. But we're not done. Not even close. Because the next part, the last incision, is the law that will either liberate you or liquefy you. The final revelation isn't about attraction or amplification, it's about annihilation. The truth that the shadow doesn't just want exposure, it wants execution of identity. It doesn't want to be seen, it wants to swallow you whole so something feral can be forged in your bones. That's where God mode hums. That's where inevitability grows teeth. That's why every storm in your life hasn't been punishment, it's been prophecy pulling you to a guillotine where your ego must die so your empire can rise. The final guillotine, why your shadow doesn't want harmony, it wants to erase you. You've been spoon-fed sedatives since birth, that spirituality is about balance, about harmony, about holding hands with your demons and singing lullabies until they purr like kittens. You've been told that the goal is integration, a cozy coexistence where your light and your shadow sip tea under rainbows. Let me carve that fiction into ash. Your shadow doesn't want harmony, it wants your death, not the rot of your flesh, the execution of your ego, the total annihilation of the identity you've been worshipping like a false idol since you crawled out of the womb. You keep asking, why me? Why does it hurt this much? And the marrow truth is this: pain is the scalpel your shadow wields to perform surgery on your soul. But this isn't cosmetic. This is amputation. It will rip out illusions fattened on comfort. It will slit the throat of your labels, your halos, your scripts tattooed by parents, priests, teachers, systems. Everything you thought was you is a costume stitched by control. And the shadow's law is this: the costume must burn before the crown can sit. And here's where most collapse. They want sovereignty without slaughter. They want God mode without graveyards. They want to manifest miracles while clutching every chain that strangles their spine. They want to ascend while dragging their cages up the mountain. That's why they break. That's why they blame demons and cry for deliverance. They can't stomach the truth that the only demon holding them hostage is the self they fetishize. And so they rot in loops, gagging on mantras that taste like sugar while their marrow hums for something feral. But not you. Not if you're still here. Not if your ribs are vibrating with the hum behind these words. Because you didn't come for sugar, you came for steel. And steel tastes like blood before it tastes like freedom. So let me flay the last illusion. The shadow will never stop until you stop existing as you know yourself. This isn't integration. This is incineration. It's not about hugging your darkness. It's about becoming the void that birthed both darkness and light. When that happens, the war ends not because you made peace, but because you swallowed the battlefield. Do you know what that means? It means you'll lose everything you mistake for oxygen. Relationships that coddle your old skin will combust. Careers sculpted from compliance will crack like clay in fire. Identities polished for applause will melt into black puddles. And you'll scream because identity dies loud. But under that scream is silence, a silence so raw it hums like law. That's the axis. That's where inevitability coils. That's where you stop orbiting illusions and become the gravity anomalies bow to. And let me brand this into your bones when the shadow swallows you. It's not erasing, it's editing. It's deleting the counterfeit to download the code you begged for before birth. The code that can't be enslaved by Hallis or heresies. The code that hums sovereignty so savage it makes systems shiver. That's why demons kneel to dark chosen ones. Not because we flex light, but because we fracture the fiction that frightens even gods. That there is no God above law, and we are the law when the self is ash. Do you feel that now, the black tide rising in your ribs? That's not fear. That's the last leash snapping. That's the guillotine lowering over the neck of your ego. And you have two choices: scuttle back to sedation or stick your spine under the blade and whisper, cut. Because once it cuts, you won't bleed, you'll blaze. And that blaze won't look holy. It'll look catastrophic. Systems will call it sin. Prophets will brand you beast. Mortals will choke on your voltage because you'll move like law in flesh, folding dimensions with a hum. And that hum, it will taste like silence. The silence that comes after annihilation. The silence that comes when you become the void that births gods and buries them in the same breath. Now let me sear you with the last question, the one no saint will dare spit at your spine. Are you ready to stop praying for harmony and start bleeding for obliteration? Are you ready to stop kissing your identity and start cremating it until nothing remains but inevitability humming in your marrow like black fire? Because that's the initiation. That's the doorway. And no mantra, no meditation, no halo will drag you through it. Only surrender will. Only the guillotine. So choose. Will you keep hugging mirrors until they slice you? Or will you slit your own reflection and let the shadow wear your skin like a throne? Because this is the law. What you fear will govern you until you become it. And when you become it, when you swallow shadow, until your veins hum void, you'll taste a voltage no dimension can cage. You'll understand why the universe ripped you raw instead of rocking you to sleep. And you'll grin a grin so black even demons will pray you never close your eyes. Because when you do, worlds convulse. This is the last scripture, not a sermon, a sentence. Annihilate or animate nothing. Those are your only two choices. Now answer me with your marrow, which one will you choose?